Hi there everyone, welcome to Coffee with Craig, your channel that deals with everything spiritual, and particularly topical spiritual things. And I've got a marvellous guest for you today, Deepak Chopra, who's brought a marvellous new book out called The Quantum Body. Well, hi Deepak, it's really a great honour to have you on the show here today. It's really nice to meet you. And obviously you're a well-known name in the spiritual movement, I suppose, the modern day spiritual movement. And so you've got this new book, which is all about connecting, I suppose, the quantum world with what tradition, I suppose, we would call the spiritual world. You quoted at the beginning of your book, I remember, you quoted from the Upanishads. You says, as is the human body, so is the cosmic body. As is the human mind, so is the cosmic mind. So this is a bit like the idea of as above, so below, correct. I suppose, really. And if we're looking at, so we're calling it the quantum, right? So that's really, when I looked at what you were writing, and I've read most of the book, not all of it, unfortunately, because of the time I've had, but it looks to me that you're taking the basically ancient knowledge of India and relating it now to modern day thinking, particularly the idea that the quantum world is in many ways described in a very similar way in the Upanishads and other Indian texts as being very similar to what the modern scientists are saying with quantum.
Yeah, so first of all, let's define what quantum means.
Yes, yeah.
Traditionally, in the scientific terminology, a quantum is the smallest unit of energy and information through which exchange occurs. So the smallest unit of energy and information in which waves are absorbed and emitted. That quantum reality is supposed to be fundamental reality. So the quantum field, as it's called, pervades all of space-time. Mm-hmm. It's around you, but it's also in you. And
so it's very similar to the idea of Brahma.
Yeah, very similar.
Yes.
But let me say what the difference is between, say, what I'm saying and what currently the quantum physicists are saying, because what I'm saying is not necessarily mainstream, although there's a movement in that direction. The quantum field has certain characteristics. So one is called superposition. Another is called non-local correlation. The third is called uncertainty principle. So before you observe a particle, it exists as a cloud of probabilities. And before it exists as a cloud of probabilities, it exists as a field of infinite possibilities. And uncertainty means that quantum virtual particles appear and disappear impermanently from the field as determined by the uncertainty principle, which means you cannot actually know with certainty.
Unless there's an observer present.
Unless there's an observer, and then it collapses into certainty. Now, if you ask quantum physicists, is the field subjective or is it objective? Most people will say it's objective. although you can never observe the field, by the way, you can only infer from various kinds of things like Brownian movement, etc. Is it subjective? Is it objective? And the fact is that subject and object are entangled in every experience. You can't have an experience till subject and object.
So in terms of our personal experience of the world,
yes,
nothing can exist without some form of consciousness there.
Absolutely.
So you're saying that the external reality is non-existent without the presence of consciousness.
Correct. The external reality is an impermanent appearance of reality which is beyond space and time.
So basically, it's like I say, it's looking at the ancient ideas of like Maya, illusion, that the world is just a dance of whatever, but it's our observation of it. So consciousness comes first.
Consciousness comes first, and then it modifies itself according to the ancient texts. It modifies itself first into mind. Mind means feelings and thoughts, intellect, ego, the five senses, the five subtle senses, the tanmatras, the five motor organs, prana, biological energy or vital energy, and then the physical world. But the physical world is not physical. Even though we say it's physical, it is not independently physical. What we call the material world, including our own bodies, is a perceptual activity in consciousness.
So you're describing it like many layers of the onion, really, like the koshas.
Yes, the koshas.
Yeah.
So, when you say this, what is this? On a materialistic point of view, this is an object. But before you can call it an object, it's an experience. Right? Unless you have the experience.
Can it be an object without the experience?
No. How would you know it's an object?
So I bet the scientists don't like this.
Yeah, it has to be an experience. What is the experience? This. Touch, sight,
the five
taste,
senses,
smell, and then thoughts and feelings.
So does it have being? I mean, we talk about being, consciousness and bliss, don't we? So does it have being without us?
No. It has no existence without us. But the us is not the body-mind. Okay? Even the body-mind is like this. So when I say
another way of looking at it is you could say the glass, because it has its form, it has glassness, as it were, like Plato said, things have a kind of an existence in their own right. Could it not also even be conscious?
It's an experience in consciousness.
Ramakrishna, I think it was, said that everything is infused with consciousness.
Yes, that's true. Everything is a modified form of consciousness. So it is only consciousness can be conscious. It can be conscious as the mind, as the intellect, as the ego, as prana, all the koshas, as the physical world. But if you trace back every experience, you end up with the infinite.
Yes, because the infinite has manifest or blossomed into consciousness. Do you think consciousness has weight? For example, an ant has consciousness, and I have consciousness. So in terms of kind of physics, I suppose, does it have like a mass of its own?
Well, these days, if you ask scientists, what are the basic fundamentals of nature? They call spin, charge, and mass. In Vedic terms, that would be sattva, rajas, and guna, the three qualities of experience. So, yes, it expresses itself as creativity, transformation, inertia, and inertia is what we call mass.
Okay, so it's like the tamasic mass. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so but you are basically taking scientific ideas, and which I think is great, to bring scientific ideas and the ancient ideas and show that they have the same basic basis to it. I mean, we were both on Enemies of Reason, I think, with our dear friend Richard Dawkins, and I'm sure the rationalists, as they call themselves, you must come up against terrible resistance from people because they say, "Oh, that's all nonsense, mysticism. That's all." It's all mystical, and they throw it out the window. I'm on your side, by the way, but they throw it out the window, don't they, as being completely not even worth consideration. I mean, how's it been trying to deal with that sort of mindset?
It's been a challenge, but here's what I realized after a while. If you're trained as a materialist, then everything is matter, including you and I. We are matter. And if you think of reality as matter, then you see everything as matter.
You can only see, your consciousness can't go further than that material plane. So
on the other hand, if somehow you think only in mental terms and emotional terms, then you see the world as mental. If you have a spiritual insight, which is beyond mental and physical, which is all infinite possibilities, then you see everything as spiritual.
Yes.
So it
depends. You can also see the psychological, and you can see the material, because really spiritual is trumps the other two, isn't it?
It's the source.
Yes.
It's the source. But again, if you read chapter 13 of the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, I am the field and I am the knower of the field. So the field, let's call it the quantum field, fundamental field, is not inert. It knows itself as mind, intellect, ego, the five senses, and the physical world.
I am that.
So, but I am that, yes, Tattvamasi. But the field itself, by the way, doesn't have a border. If it doesn't have a border, it doesn't have a form. If it doesn't have a form, it's infinite. It's timeless. It's spaceless. In a sense, it's incomprehensible. You cannot imagine it. You can't touch it. You can't see it. It's the one that's doing the imagination, the touching, the feeling. And
this is where consciousness itself sits.
Consciousness knows itself as the world.
And of course, life itself manifests. But when we see a person die, I'm a medium by profession,
yes,
so I'm very interested in what happens and what life itself is. When somebody dies, the life force, as Yogananda called it, the lifetrons or the prana or the five pranas leave the body, and within no time the body's dead. So there's something there, isn't there? And I think with spiritual healing, for example, they say that the healing will always know where to go. It's like the prana is conscious and knows what to do and knows how to heal us and knows how to make things work. So when these materialists say it's all about evolution, it's all about DNA, couldn't there also be like a spiritual DNA to these things? That,
right now, if you
transmit experience,
if you talk to some physicists, they will say that the DNA is influenced by the quantum field. What is DNA? It's a symbolic representation of experience, not just your experience, but the experiences of your ancestors. In fact, all your ancestors are alive in every cell of your body. You couldn't even move your hand without their help. So DNA is the symbolic representation of karma in a way. Okay? And not only your karma, but karma of your ancestors, going back to karma of microbes and animals.
This is our body is a manifest form of physical karma, as it were, passed on through my parents
and before their parents,
and yet we also have a spiritual karma we bring into this life, which is also
it's only spiritual. Yes, what looks like manifest is temporary. So when we talk about birth and death, for example, most people confuse death and life as opposites. But that's not true. Birth is the opposite of death. Death is the opposite of birth. One goes on, the other goes off. And you can't have an on without an off. And in fact, birth and death are happening at lightning speeds, at the level of photons, at the level of thought, at the level of emotions. And
the Buddhists call it constant reincarnation, I think.
Constant recycling, incarnation. In fact, the whole universe is a recycling operation. Everything recycles, even plastic. It takes a long time. But nothing exists that doesn't recycle. Now, you can call it reincarnation, but what is recycling is memory. Memory, karma, desire. So what we call a person is the recycling of karma, or the reincarnation. Birth and death are opposites, but life is the continuum of birth and death. Mm-hmm. You can't have life if there's only birth. If there's only death, you can't have life. Mm-hmm. And they're happening at lightning speeds. What happened 5 minutes ago is no longer exists. No. It's dead.
Yeah.
And by the time you hear these words, they don't exist. So, they say, and in Western traditions too, our life is a dream. We're asleep, but once in a while we wake up enough to know that we're dreaming.
Yeah.
What you wake up to is the field of joy and bliss.
And it exists in the now only?
Only now. Yeah. There's nothing.
So I even question the now. I always wondered.
Now is not a moment in time. Now is eternal.
Yeah. So my work as a medium, I've got to ask you, what do you think happens after death?
Let me ask you a simple question. Bear with me for a moment, okay? Do you remember what you had for breakfast this morning?
Just about. I'm getting to that age.
Okay. You remember what you had for breakfast. Do you remember any incidents from your childhood?
Yes.
So before I asked you that question, where was that information?
In my memory.
Yeah, but memory is not here. It actualizes here and as the body when I asked you the question. Mm-hmm. Do you remember what you were doing at 2 o'clock Tuesday morning last week? Unless it was very significant, you wouldn't, right? No. So actually, you cannot retrieve a memory unless you go to the field of consciousness.
That's true. In fact, perhaps in that field of consciousness, there are all the memories.
There are.
I understand it that everything,
every experience
is there in the Akashic. Yeah.
So now let's take another analogy. What happens to the space here if these walls no longer exist? Still there, right? Just now it's not contained here.
Okay.
So where do we go after death? We are there now. We cannot have a thought, we cannot have an emotion, we cannot retrieve a memory, we cannot have any experience unless we go back to the source. Mm-hmm. So we don't go anywhere. We're there now.
Yes.
Okay, what happens, of course, is it's no longer confined to this room, just like the space is no longer confined. But the space inside this room is one with the space outside that room, and it's one with the space here, and it's one with the space between every thought, every emotion, every perception. That space of infinite being is constantly modifying itself as memories, as desires, what we call karma, vasana, sanskara. Mm-hmm. That is what recycles as this appearance. But it never leaves. So if you talk to a true Vedantist, where do we go after death? He said, I never left.
No. That's as I understand. I believe, when I think, what am I, which is the big question.
Correct.
I think, well, I can only really see myself as being a kind of a point of consciousness somewhere.
That's it.
And this is one part of my experience of a point of consciousness. And I think when we die, we drop this overcoat, as it were, and we return to our other clothes, whatever the spiritual body might be. But we still continue to have an experience of another plane of existence, the lokars, I suppose they've called it in the Sanskrit idea, or they have different ideas in different parts of India about this. But there is another world, another spiritual world. This is what we as mediums seem to come across. And most spiritualists have a kind of a pretty simplistic idea about what that is, because they've not even questioned what this reality is, let alone what the next one might be. But it seems, again, a bit like the koshas, that there's many layers to ourself, and that we just step back from this world and we're in another world that has a little bit like the quantum world, in that people that speak from it describe it as being a place where time is different. That's all they can explain. They can't say it's all happening at once, or time goes forward or backwards. They just say it's different. We can't explain the nature of time here. So it makes me wonder that perhaps that quantum world that physicists are describing, and you're looking at it with new eyes, really, is possibly another layer of existence, possibly another whole universe of experience for us after death.
Well, in the Yoga Vashishta, there's a phrase from the great yogi Vashishta. It says, infinite universes come and go in the vast expanse of consciousness, like motes of dust dancing in a beam of light.
Yes, they almost think big, don't they?
Now, like motes of dust, infinite. Now, today, the latest theories in quantum physics are infinite universes. But the difference is that scientists think of these different universes as actual physical universes, whereas the yogis think of them, loka means, in English, would mean location. So loka, infinite locations in space-time. But
the multiverse, no less.
The multiverse, infinite locations in space-time. But the yogis say they're not locations in space-time. They're frequency domains of consciousness. They're frequency domains of consciousness. And they're all equally real or equally unreal, because we say this is real. We don't realize this is also a dream loka. So, whether you're talking about the Tibetan bardos or the Tibetan worlds, or you're going all the way, infinite lokas.
It's all just as much an illusion.
It's basically all just, the dream continues. The dream continues.
There's one more thing I'd love to ask you about, actually. I mean, I consulted, and people watch this channel, I've talked about it a lot. I consulted my Naadi leaves, and I think you might have done that.
I have.
I think.
Yeah.
That made me question everything when I saw this, particularly about the nature of time and whether we can see the future and so forth. And with the Naadi leaves, the great rishis have written messages to each of us in which it tells us our parents' names are and time of birth and miraculous things, and even with the most strongest sort of restraints put on it so they can't check anything out, they come up with all that information and all the things about one's life, all written on from your thumbprint that finds the bundle. For me, it was an absolutely transformative experience, because it was almost like something snapped. It was like something I was seeing a different way of experiencing the world. How could these people, possibly thousands of years ago, in another time, a wonderful time of higher consciousness, how did they know those things? How did you react? How did you feel with it?
It was very liberating, because then birth and death lose their meaning. Okay, because what is birth? It's the beginning of an experience. Death is the end of that story line. But even in daily life, we have infinite stories about us. Right? So in the bigger scheme, there are infinite stories that your soul or your consciousness can take. So it was very liberating to me. And, in the beginning, I couldn't rationalize it. But then I realized that it's probably some kind of spiritual algorithm.
Yes, I wondered that.
It's so when people go into this state of pure consciousness, then they can access lines of continuity for a particular mode of consciousness, which is what we are. We're a particular mode of consciousness. But it's still very intriguing. Because when I asked the Naadi leaf people, how do you do it? They said, we don't. It's just written.
We just read the leaf. We just read the leaf.
Yes.
It's amazing.
But, they can predict the time of your death, everything.
And it changes depending upon, of course, this is the other interesting thing. You do the remedies, which are spiritual acts and charitable acts often, and then you can change and shift. So it means that they've seen destiny, they've seen your fate, they've seen your direction, they've seen your path.
It's very quantum.
But then you can change it.
Yeah, it's very
totally
quantum. Depending on the way you do the experiment, you just change the appearance of
absolute quantum.
It's absolutely quantum.
Yeah, it's a fascinating world.
Is it a wave? Is it a particle?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how you do the experiment.
Yeah, and then if we change what we do and the way we think, suddenly it becomes something different
wave,
to what we expected.
of course, is a product of infinite possibilities. Right.
Yeah, and it takes our whole life. Yeah. And I think the one thing that we've talked quite cerebrally about this, but it's the wonder of it all, isn't it? Ultimately,
it's incomprehensible.
Incomprehensible scale of it.
The infinite is incomprehensible, and therefore it makes itself comprehensible by expressing itself as finite. How do you imagine something that has no borders, that is spaceless, that is timeless, that is non-conceptualizable and not perceivable, and yet without it there would be no perception, no cognition, no space, no time, no imagination.
No.
So it's incomprehensible.
It's absolutely incomprehensible. Yeah. And how close do you feel you've got to taking it from knowledge to wisdom to knowing?
I think in the end, after you've struggled all your life, you surrender to the divine. It's called Ishwar Pranidhana. It's the last niyama. So you have the yamas and the niyamas. The first niyama is ahimsa, and the first principle is ahimsa, which is peace consciousness, peace presence, and the last is Ishwar Pranidhana. You surrender.
Yeah.
I think I'm pretty close to
that's what we have. And actually, the niyamas, are really, if anybody's got a problem, they come to see people like myself and my wife for solve your problems. Just read them. It's all there, isn't it?
Ahimsa is peace presence. And Ishwar Pranidhana, they're the bookends, Ahimsa and then Ishwar Pranidhana. Everything else is in between. As a way of comprehending or trying to comprehend the nature of reality. But in the end, you have to surrender to divinity. Because if I ask you, why is there a universe? Why do we exist? Not only we exist, we are aware of our existence, because if there was existence without us being aware, then it wouldn't exist. Non-existence is not an experience. Even if I do this practice where I imagine my physical death, I imagine my cremation, and I imagine, dust to dust, it's all gone. But I can't get rid of the one who's imagining.
No.
Okay, the consciousness that imagines, you can't get rid of it. Okay, it's impossible. So, because it's
people
infinite.
Like Rama Maharishi, for example, seems to suggest to us always that there's no self in the first place. When you look for who am I, there's nothing there. There's no existence as far as I understand it. This is where I was asked at the beginning of, does consciousness have weight? One of the things I've always puzzled over when we ask the question, who am I? What is my personality? It seems to me that personality seems to continue after death, from what I've worked with mediumship and things like that. I describe a person's grandmother and I give all the details about them, their name and things like that. It seems to suggest that personality has survived death. So is there something that still continues? Is that personality have weight of some sort? I know at the core we are the infinite. We are Brahma. We are nothing more than the universe unfolding. But we also have this strange thing called identity, and with it, will. And those things puzzle me, because I don't know what I am. I don't know what my will is. Have you puzzled with that or thought?
Yeah, but the people have talked about that. Rumi, for example, says you're not just a drop in the ocean, you're the ocean in the drop. So, if I look at different parts of the ocean, different drops, depending on their location and the ecosystem, they have different hues, okay, remnants. So what survives is the remnants of experience that shape our personality. But in the scheme of the eternal, even that is a, what should I say, provisional identity. You have an absolute identity, which is divine. Brahman is Atman. But then you need Jiva. Jiva is the residue of experience, which we call the personality. So yes, it can survive till ultimate liberation.
So ultimately, we get rid of the jiva completely. And then we become God. Right.
Yeah.
So we are God, becoming conscious of being God, perhaps.
Yes. Yeah. We are the divine, assuming this form.
Well, I don't think we can go much further than that, can we?
No.
So
now, coming back though to why we shouldn't argue with materialists is that if you think of yourself as matter, then everything else will appear as matter. If you think of yourself as mind, everything will appear as mind. If you think of yourself as spirit, then everything is divine.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much the idea also in our life too. As we think, so we become, and also as we think, so the world becomes.
That's right.
And that the power of the consciousness, the power of the mind, kind of trumps the whole lot, really.
Yes.
We don't have to worry.
No,
we're in control of it all.
Yes. Craig, this has been very interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today.
Very honored to speak to you, and it's been a delight.
Yes, it's very, very, very interesting. And I'm sure that that you'll all want to run out and buy the new book, which is all going to be in the description of the video below. So you can go and find your links for that and for Deepak's upcoming seminars and talks that he's doing here in the UK. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
That was great.
Thank you, that was really interesting. I mean, I found it personally really interesting. I'm sure others will find it.